So, welcome back to another channel update. It's been a little while since I did the last one, in which most of the bad things I said actually didn't come to pass because I didn't have to reduce the amount of content I was producing, because this has remained really my source of part-time income while I'm at university, and this works out very well for me because it's more relaxing to do this than work at a petrol station late at night. And also it's far more enjoyable. Of course, I don't actually make as much money from it, but it's honestly not that much less. To be fair, petrol stations don't really pay all that well. So yeah, it was a good thing overall, and it's been enough time, I think, and enough things warrant talking about with regards to what could happen in the near future, that I felt that another channel update was necessary. There are three main topics I want to cover today. One that could be potentially bad, one that could be potentially good, and one that will definitely be good. So there's a smorgasbord of information that I'm going to be giving out today, and I think we'll start off with the thing that could be potentially bad, because we can get the shite out of the way and then talk about things that are slightly happier. So anyone who's been watching YouTube videos lately is probably aware of something called COPPA. Now, COPPA is the latest big existential threat to come looming for YouTube. None of these have really been the death of YouTube, as many people have said. Certain things have been in the past, although to be fair, Article 13 hasn't really come into effect yet. And to be fair, I will talk about this a little bit more later, but Article 13 is probably more likely to have an impact on me than this particular one. But COPPA honestly is pretty bad for YouTube as a platform. I'm not sure it's going to be as terrible as a lot of people are sort of saying. And obviously a lot of the big creators that this is going to affect have really been doomsaying very hard, because this is their livelihood after all, and they're well within their rights to try and pick this up as much as possible to try and make this less awful for them. And to be fair, there is still a potential for, there is still room for that to happen, but it's not looking good at the moment. And certainly COPPA is, you won't catch me saying COPPA is a good thing by any means, even if, as I will go into later as well, it probably won't affect me, and even if it does, there are a couple of things I can do to make sure that it probably won't. But still, what is COPPA? Well, COPPA's an American law that essentially prohibits the ability to collect online data for children. So the thing that this, obviously Google have landed themselves in hot water, is because the way they make pretty much all of their bank is by targeted advertisements, and obviously, targeted advertisements are those under the age of 13. They're going to be rife on YouTube. That's a lot of money for them. The FTC was able, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC in the US, was able to actually categorically prove that Google were doing this on purpose. And as a result, Google had to pay, I think it was a $170 million settlement. But as part of the settlement, Google have kind of messed up in a few ways, because obviously they've had to sort of change their guidelines. So anyone who makes content on YouTube, so I'm sure that probably a couple of the others I would say, on the in the Third Age Reforged scene, have probably seen this appear on their YouTube Studio beta as well. Is the new COPPA guidelines, where you essentially have to mark your videos as being for kids or not for kids. Now, the problem with this is that if you mark your videos for children, you essentially dodge any of the potential problems, which we'll get onto in just a moment as well. Legally, you are essentially covering your own arse, which is a good thing. But it also completely hamstrings the money-making potential of your channel. You lose up to, I think, about 90% of your revenue, because you can't run targeted ads on your platform at that point, which makes your channel, basically worthless to a lot of advertisers, because they need targeted ads, because this doesn't just end targeted ads for children, it ends targeted ads completely, because obviously there's no way to know who's using the computer is, an under 13-year-old or an over 13-year-old. So, the only way for YouTube to actually enforce this is to just say targeted ads or no targeted ads. And if you say no targeted ads, that's a lot less money that your channel can make, which is obviously a big problem for those who do this as a living, because if they do potentially make content that could put them at risk, they're going to have to tick this box, otherwise they're going to risk legal action against themselves. But obviously it means that they can't really make a living from this anymore, so it's kind of a catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you do click that your videos are not for children, you then open yourselves up to scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission, which of course means that if you are found in breach of this, if they decide, it's not up to you to decide, this sort of honour system, they decide whether your videos are sort of targeted at children or not, which is a potential problem, as we'll go into again a little bit later on. I'm trying to keep some sort of structure here, but not really doing a particularly good job of it. But if they decide your videos are intended for children, then you will be liable for a fine, essentially. And they decide this, obviously legal action will then follow. which is not great. Obviously, this all sounds very, very scary. It's not maybe as scary as it sounds on paper. I mean, it could certainly be a real problem depending on how they decide to enforce this. And the reason that this has happened essentially is Google, they want to pass the buck off onto the people who make content for their platform. They essentially don't want to be the ones to do anything about this. So all they're doing essentially is paying the fine and then allowing the FTC in to sort of deal with individual creators on an individual basis. Now this, from a Google point of view, is a massive risk, and it's actually incredibly incompetent for them to have taken this route. They may not have had a choice, but I suspect that they probably did, and that they went this route because it puts them under the least financial pressure. But in the end, it could end up backfiring spectacularly, depending on how the FTC just chooses to enforce this going forward. So, essentially, Google now is technically not liable, although again, I'm not entirely sure that this is true. I think in several cases they would still be liable. But again, I'm not really a lawyer, so I don't really know a huge amount about this in terms of details. All I know is sort of the basic stuff that I've had a look at, because obviously as a content creator it does behoove me to try and keep up on these sorts of things, even if I don't fully understand most of the details myself. But yeah, what Google have essentially done is said, the ironic thing here is that the way Google have done this is obviously they've essentially pointed the FTC at the creators on the platform to try and sort of shift the blame from themselves, and therefore any of the potential legal costs involved with this, and put it onto their creators. But the irony is that they will continue to run targeted ads, and they'll probably continue to run targeted ads on children. So, it's the FTC is not doing their job, but again, we'll get on to towards the end of this particular section why I don't think the FTC care about that all that much. But yeah, and it could also backfire pretty spectacularly on Google, because if the FTC decides to enforce it in a certain way, it could kill YouTube as a platform. I mean, I don't think it will, but it could. I mean, it definitely has the potential to at its very worst. And speaking of which, there are two ways that the FTC could choose to enforce this. One is not very well. I'm sure that anyone is familiar with the hilarious attempt by the UK government to essentially mean that adult content needs a license on the internet. This was never going to be able to be enforced properly. It was either a blanket ban of any site that had anything remotely adult on it, to the point where you would need a license, which obviously was not feasible, or it was a very wishy-washy system which essentially wouldn't have worked. And I feel as though that's kind of a similar situation to the one they're in now, albeit slightly easier for the FTC to do things, but it's still not easy by any means, because essentially they could go for the wishy-washy approach, which would essentially boil down to them singling out a couple of big names, sort of a couple of large heads for them to hang over their mantle, essentially, to sort of claim that they've done something worthwhile, and then essentially leave it at that, because they have to manually check all of the videos that they flag. Essentially, some FTC operatives will comb through YouTube, and sort of anything that they see as risky or sort of for children that has not been marked as such, they will then flag, and then sort of the process will begin, essentially. The problem is, though, the blueprint for this would be China. Obviously, China do this. They employ literally thousands of people, though, to comb the internet for things that are anti-government, whereas the FTC certainly doesn't have the resources to do that. And there are, I think it's like 500 hours of content uploaded every 5 minutes to YouTube, so there's no way they're going to be able to police all of it. So that's one reason why they might just go after some big names and sort of leave it at that. The other thing they could do is be far more general with it. They could just say, well, anything that looks like it is for kids from the outside looking in, we're going to flag. The difficulty with this is several of the legal cases they then fight will probably go against them, because it will be provable that it's not. And also, this is the sort of thing which, this would be the response that for Google it would backfire on them horribly, because then hundreds, if not thousands, of creators would be essentially exterminated overnight, and then YouTube as a platform will start to die. And the silver lining to that is a competitor would then have to sort of grab the bull by the horns and sort of rise up to replace YouTube. But it's unlikely that this is the chain of events that will happen, just because even this would be fairly difficult for the FTC to manually comb through absolutely everything. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do it. I mean, this is the sort of thing where we'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. But the matter of enforcement is one of the reasons why I'm maybe not as worried as several other people might be. But still, it will still affect creators in some way, especially the bigger ones, I think, because they're the ones that are going to be more in the firing line, because of course, if they have something which the FTC construe as being for kids, then they are liable. You know, it's not up to them, and you know, it will ultimately come down to what's up to courts if people decide to fight it, which again, all of these are very scary things for just someone who's posting up videos on YouTube and wants to make a little bit of change on the side. Yeah, it's kind of it is a bad situation, to be honest with you. It's the sort of thing where I can imagine it either being absolutely nothing at all, or it could be catastrophic. And again, this comes into effect, I think, January 1st. So we won't have to wait too long to see if YouTube's going to fall apart at the seams. I mean, I can't say it wouldn't be deserved, but it would kind of suck for me, having built up a bit of a channel for myself, to see it crumble. Even if, you know, it doesn't affect me directly, it could affect me by proxy in that way. And why it shouldn't affect me is essentially my content is not for kids, and I don't think there's a way that the FTC could look at it and say that it was. I'm sure that some of the people that they're employing here are not exactly too savvy, and they might think that all video games equals children. And if that's the case, then anyone who makes video game content, even if it's something like Grand Theft Auto, are going to be in trouble. But it shouldn't affect me, because the good thing about having a very singular focused channel up until now is the fact that either everything is alright or none of it is. And the good thing about Total War, especially Medieval 2 Total War, it's rated 16 and up, so it's certainly not designed for children in that way. It's also a strategy game, so it's not, you know, too appealing for those under 13, I don't think. Certainly not the kind of people that the FTC will be, quote unquote, most worried about. So yeah, it shouldn't affect me. But it'd be interesting to see if it does. I mean, what I'd do if it did, obviously the main thing would be to immediately turn monetization off. If it was clear that it was going to affect anyone doing gaming related content, I would immediately just nuke the monetization feature on my channel, and I'd have to, I suppose I'd start up something like Patreon. I might do that anyway, honestly, just as a backup ahead of time. I might start up a Patreon, because obviously the problem is that if I did have to demonetize my channels, I would be able to keep it going, but I would then need to find part-time employment elsewhere once again, and that would obviously drastically reduce the amount of content I could put up. The reason I can do this as much as I can at the moment is because it's financially viable for me to do so. If it was not, then there would be potential problems there. But you know, maybe I will start off a Patreon just as a backup, just in case I do need to turn off monetization. Of course, it could be as simple as just putting a disclaimer at the start of your videos, like this video is not for under 13s, or you could take a far more sort of brutal approach with it maybe, and just start swearing every 5 seconds, maybe put something like some hentai in the thumbnail or something. Really get hardcore with this, but it probably won't come to that, to be honest with you. We'll see. Again, it's the sort of thing I can't really lay down any concrete plans, because I don't really know. It shouldn't affect me, but even if it does, there are certain things I can do. I don't think it's going to be... I don't think it will end in the death of my channel. There is the outside possibility that it could, but I don't think it will. Yeah, it is interesting. I think that the most negative thing that could happen, obviously the death of my channel is a very outside bet. Something that is a little bit more likely though is I might have to turn off all the monetization features, and that will, once again, just like in the last channel update, it would unfortunately impact on the amount of content that I'd be able to put out. But we shall see. I mean, the reasons why this has happened, it's all a pretty big mess. One is YouTube's, you know, incompetence and greed, I would suppose. The way that they've responded to this is, it's very typical of them, to be honest with you. They've essentially thrown all their users, or attempted to throw all their users under the bus so that they don't have to pay any more money. Interestingly enough, I don't think that's been entirely successful on their part, because I do think they are still liable in several cases. So yeah, from their perspective, it's because that, again, incompetence and greed, as is common among most big companies like this. And from the FTC's perspective as well, it's pretty much the ideal sort of situation for the FTC in many ways, because if the American law system is good at one thing, it's raising money, and in this situation they get to do two things. One is, you know, anytime they find someone, obviously that money goes into their pockets, which is always very nice for them, obviously a nice money maker, a nice easy money maker, and also the fact that they get to look like they're protecting children online, you know, so it looks like they're doing morally the right thing as well. It's it's absolutely irresistible from their point of view to do something like this, and now they've essentially been given the go-ahead by YouTube to have at it, basically. We've got to bend over and get the lube ready in several cases. I mean, if you make content that's you know, people who do like toy reviews and stuff like that, or maybe like sort of cartoon reviews, sort of that sort of thing. I'm not sure how big the market for that sort of thing is on YouTube. I think the toy review market is pretty big though. Yeah, any family-oriented channels as well are kind of screwed from this as well. It's all a big mess. But ultimately, the closing thoughts from this, obviously, this has been a rather long section because it's kind of a complicated topic, and I don't really know all the details on it. But the closing thoughts on this: bad for YouTube, bad for most content creators, but it shouldn't affect me. And yeah, that's the hope anyway. I mean, if it does, then we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it, I suppose. But moving on to happier things, I think. Let's move on to the thing that will definitely be good, just to sort of soften the blow of potential American lawyers knocking down the content creators' doors. We have Silmarillion Total War, and over the next week or so, I hope to get at least a couple of Silmarillion Total War videos out. Because it is now in the position where, you know, it's playable. It's in sort of like the early alpha stage. Some of the factions have been completed, and games are starting to happen. So hopefully I can play in a couple of games myself. I already have one replay which I'm going to be doing at some point. I'm not sure whether that will be the first Silmarillion replay I show or not. I think it may very well be. We shall see. But yeah, it's good stuff. Silmarillion is now on the horizon, and I will technically be covering two games at long last, even if they are two sort of very, very similar games in terms of sort of what they are. Obviously, Silmarillion and Reforged are both Third Age submods, so in many ways it's kind of the same thing, but also at the same time it's not. They are very different mechanically, and it does introduce a little bit of variety, which I think is sorely needed on the channel, so that I can keep my positive outlook on things. But yeah, Silmarillion is here, and I will be doing a couple of videos on that going forwards. I won't be doing anything like faction overviews in the immediate future until it's far closer to being released, because obviously in the state that it's in at the moment, everything is very subject to change, so there's no point in me doing stuff like faction overviews or top 10s or anything like that for Silmarillion, because everything could change next week. So, but even so, it is still a good thing that Silmarillion is here, because like I said, variety. Hopefully I'll be able to do some varied battles myself and then get them out over the course of the next week or so. And it should be good. Like, a lot of good work has gone into Silmarillion. Like, just having a cursory glance over the Discord is enough to see, you know, a lot of people are very motivated to make this good. Because obviously it is a topic which hasn't really been tackled as yet in the Third Age community space. It's all been to do with the War of the Ring era. Also, there was the Fourth Age mod, I suppose, for Rome, but there hasn't been anything to do with the Silmarillion. Obviously, most people who are big fans of Tolkien are big fans of the Silmarillion. I actually personally don't really know a great deal about the Silmarillion, I'm going to be honest. You know, my entire area of expertise comes from the bit that most people know an awful lot about, which is the War of the Ring. But yeah, Silmarillion on the horizon, and that will definitely be something I cover in great detail, obviously, so that is something to be excited for. And then finally, the thing which could potentially be good, something which I haven't really done before, is streaming. Now, streaming is something which, for one, you need a clearly defined amount of time to be able to do. You also need sort of the right internet to be able to do it. Now, I should have all the specs I need to do streaming, but the problem is finding the time to do it. Now, I do want to do it at least a couple of times. You know, in my quote-unquote YouTube career. Now, the streaming thing, I will be able to do it over the Christmas break. I think a couple of times. I'm sort of researching on how to do it. Like, I'm not really familiar on how to stream at all. You know, I haven't really done any of the research as of yet, but I do want to do at least a couple of them. You know, like, again, my expertise with streaming is non-existent, basically. And new things are scary, and I don't want to sort of mess it up, quote unquote. I do, yeah, I'm stumbling over my words here, but essentially what's going to be happening is I want to do some streaming over the Christmas period, and I just want to see how it goes. Like, again, it's unlikely that I'll be able to make that and sort of commit to making that a regular thing, even if it did go well, purely because as soon as the Christmas break was over, I'd be right back into it with university. But I mean, potentially. I mean, if I was going to stream, it would be on the YouTube platform as well, because, you know, that's where all my channel is. Like, I wouldn't bother making a whole new Twitch channel just for that. Although if YouTube does end up dying because of this whole COPPA business, maybe I would have to. Although I'm sure that a company like Twitch is also going to be subject to that sort of thing going forward as well. All big tech companies make, or all big sort of channel companies like this, I should say, sort of online content, make their money through targeted ads first and foremost. But yeah, I want to do some streaming, at least a couple of them, you know, just to see what it's like. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, obviously there would be the Third Age Reforged and potentially some Silmarillion Total War on the menu for that, but also maybe some other things. Like, I feel as though streaming is the place to do long form content. Like, I think Total War campaigns, they don't really lend themselves too well to an episodic series on YouTube. I think they do lend themselves far better to streaming because they can be so big, and as much as people may say they want this, it's a case of you don't know what you want, I do kind of thing, because about 5 parts into a big long series like that, 90% of the people have already lost interest. Whereas with streams, it's a little bit different. You know, streams I think are a little bit more conducive to long-running Total War campaigns, for example. It doesn't even have to be Total War, it could be anything like Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition has recently released, and I feel as though that's something else which would probably be a little bit better in streaming format for me. But also things that are completely unrelated to strategy games, obviously with... I'm not really sure. Like, it's the sort of thing which I would be willing to listen to feedback on. Like, I do want to do at least a couple of streams, though, like I said. And again, I don't really know what I'm doing with regards to streams at the moment. I'm going to have to look into how to go about it. I'm sure it's not all that complicated. There is a go live button on YouTube. It may just be as simple as just clicking on that and letting YouTube do most of the grunt work for you. But we shall see. Again, that's a topic which will only really come into effect, I think, in sort of mid-December, or sort of mid to late December when I'm on Christmas break. But it is still something to sort of keep an eye on in the near future. So yeah, a bit of a mixed bag with regards to the news on the channel update this time. I think I've rambled on long enough. I repeated myself plenty in that video. These are unscripted. I just sort of say what I'm thinking at the time. And yeah, I mean, we'll see. This COPPA business, it really is the sort of thing where I have to just sort of wait and see what happens. As for the other two things, again, you know, Silmarillion is definitely going to be happening, so that's something to be excited about. And as far as the streaming goes, it's something I want to do, and I would say it's 80% likely that I'm going to be doing it over the Christmas break. If it becomes apparent that it's more trouble than it's worth, then I won't bother. But I really do want to do at least a couple of streams, just so that I can say I've done it. You know, and it'll be interesting to see how many people actually watch it as well. You know, I have a decent subscriber base, and the amount of views I get per video, it would be interesting to see how many views I get for a stream. You know, we can always frame it in that way as well. So yeah, I hope you found this somewhat informative, just another channel update. I think this channel update is actually probably the longest one that I've done so far. So yeah, hope you found this informative about what's going to be happening in the near future. And next video I think will be another Reforged video. I think it will be another quick, a reasonably quick Elven free-for-all, 4 Elven factions going at it. And then I think it will be a Silmarillion video, honestly. So yeah, hope you found this informative, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.